This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air. Kay Chan, multi-talented freelance presentation engineer. So we want to welcome you to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. I'm hoping things will be pleasant because I'm very, very new to this.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, we're a live podcaster, so that can be intimidating to some folks because we don't actually edit. We do it live like a radio interview, but we find that that allows us to be kind of like in the moment, kind of flow state. And being a creative person, we find that it generates interesting conversation. So one of the first things we always ask anybody who joins the podcast is like, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
That's a very good question. What motivates me? I think, honestly, it should be my job and what I do and what passion I have for it. But I'm sure everyone can agree that, you know, even having a passion for your job and doing great at what you do, it ends up being work nonetheless. And you kind of get lost in that. Um, that it no longer becomes fun per se. It's not something that you do as a hobby anymore. It's just something that you do to survive. Um, what really gets me up in the morning is my 1-year-old daughter. I think everybody says that, it's either their kin or family member of some sort. And the other thing is golf. And you know what? Maybe not in that order.
that's, that's great.
um,
Well, it's good to
no,
know, like, sometimes you gotta have boundaries, right? Like, 'cause sometimes, like, some people, you get these executives, the CEOs, it's like their whole life is work, and then their families are, like, suffering because there's, like, no time spent with anybody, but the work is the driven thing, and when you can carve out, the things that are important to you and create, like, boundaries for your soul your spirit and your soul and your heart, it's like, it's not work isn't everything we are. Sometimes it tends to be, but it's good to have balance.
right. And don't get me wrong, Phantom. I didn't have that perspective 4 years ago. If you had asked me then, it would just be my job, my work, the passion I have for it, or seeking perfection. I think those were the things that used to motivate me until I had my daughter,
Mhm.
until I discovered golf, and you know, after that, it was more like, oh yeah, I'm working for them instead, and I'm working to have this other passion that I'm ridiculously addicted to, and you know, my wife can't talk me out of.
Yeah, it's very important to kind of have the work life balance. I think the pandemic kind of gave us some aspect of that because like if you were a workaholic and you're never home, there you were like forced to be home. Then you're like,
You're
oh,
right.
like can I enjoy my home or do I not enjoy my home? you know.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Coming into the stage of where I am right now, my entire life was just work or seeking work. And, it's been that vicious cycle over and over again. And it's weird because um, having not known the greener pasture on the other side of the fence, I was
Mhm.
so acclimated to the way I was living, so acclimated, so, comfortable with it that I didn't have other expectations. I just knew that what I was doing was something that provided for me. And at the same time, I don't exist otherwise without it. I don't know if you can, agree with that statement, but that's essentially how I felt coming in prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's a really, the pandemic caused like the great resignation, caused a lot of people to question like why are they doing what they were doing? I used to be on the kind of hamster wheel of being on a flight on Sunday, flying out to a client on, up to Thursday and then coming back and doing it again and again and again, just being a road warrior. And a
Right.
lot of us thought that that's the way it should be, right? But then it's like after the pandemic, we weren't doing that in the middle of the. It's like you're like, oh, suddenly we're home. It's like, oh, how do you balance that? Now you're at home. It's like, oh, how do I live at home? How do I
Right.
operate at home?
I mean, what am I gonna do with all this free time? You know, it's
Yeah.
it's kind of insane now that you really said it. Yeah, I mean, before the pandemic, that's all it was. Wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, commute 30 minutes to my corporate job, and rinse and repeat. Um, and that's the thing too was uh, being paid that $40 40 hour salary um, when you're working 60 hours a week, and that vicious cycle is like I don't know. I've gotten complacent with it, and it wasn't until the pandemic when I started to realize, hey, there's something more. You know,
Yeah, and it starts to, a lot of people became, entrepreneurs, or like I went from being a salary guy to being a consultant because I decided, like, well, you know what? If I'm going to work 60, 70 hours, I might as well get paid for my hours. And
right,
if I have a setup where I could work remotely and then do those hours instead of spending the time in the Uber, spending the time at the airport, spending the time on the bus, I actually can spend the time for billable hours and actually do better and then have
right,
time to do things like this. Where
exactly.
before, if I'm at the 20 hours commuting, you know, like I wasted that's a lot of wasted time that I can now do my passion things, you know.
Right, right, right. I think the pandemic, as bad as it was, uh, I think if people were in a different position where their mindset was to be more opportunistic, the pandemic actually opened a lot of doors for a lot of people to just be a lot more bold,
Mhm.
and
'Cause you finally had the time to do it, right? Like, you finally had the time to actually be able to think with your thoughts, right? 'Cause there's so many people are on the train, like, they're rolling on that railroad of, the corporate world, the rat race,
right,
and they
right,
don't have time to try well, I wanna try that idea, but I don't have time to try that idea. Well, now you can.
exactly, exactly. It like that opportunity is no longer just stuck in your head. You know, you have the open field to just seek it out, make it happen. If anything, it's the opportunity to try and fail.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with failure because a lot of times, like being an artist, I would point out if you're a singer, songwriter, or producer, like I would say, a lot of our time, most of that stuff, you could look at that as a failure. Like if we spend all this time and then we only have like 5 minutes of what we actually produced is what is usable out of hours worth of work. You could look at that as
Right,
like, well, that looks like a lot of wasted time, but like it's the way you look at these, a half full or half an empty. Like, is the experience of getting to that point where you had all these things were kind of didn't work and then this one did? Is that the happy accident or the work you did? Is that something you think was a waste of time or was that valuable to you?
right. I absolutely empathize with you in that regard. I mean, as an artist or illustrator in the design world, whatever spectrum you're in, um, I think specifically in the creative field is that you're never going to excel any better unless you're making those mistakes. And I lived what a good 40 some odd years of making constant mistakes, but they're always new mistakes. It's not the same mistakes, and
Mhm.
having learned from that, and having grown from that, I think that's key to actually perfecting what it is that we want out of life. And obviously your job, your passion, all that stuff, I mean, it's built out of failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. So many people, we have so many tools that there's this tendency to want to have perfection. Like I have a lot of tools where I can make something sonically seem perfect. But as an artist, what everybody starts to realize is imperfections have character. If you're a
Yeah.
painter and you're doing something, certain brushstrokes, it might be a mistake, but it has character. And same thing, like a lot of things that you do might like we call the happy accident, like in
Yes.
inventing, right? If you do something as a scientist, there's a lot of happy accidents that are very profitable. And it's just the willingness to actually dive into it. If you had a project plan and then
Right.
suddenly something happened that wasn't on the plan, but it looked actually better than what you were doing, do you have the guts to actually say, maybe we should go this path? or do you want to just stay on the train and say, well, that's not on the path, so I'm not going to do
Right.
it?
I mean, absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, so many of my designs is just from experimenting, right? Understanding where it is that I want to go, and then setting a path for it. Along the way, I'm gonna find something that's, I didn't intend to do, but then I'm like, wait a minute, I think I might be onto something better, you know? And I bet I'm certain with musicians and artists and, of all caliber, um, they go through the same thing.
Yeah.
And like you said, those are very, very happy accidents. You know, if I just paved the way and got exactly what it was I want, I mean, sure, it'll be a quicker trip, but then I never would have discovered, this better path.
Yeah. It's like the experience of life. Like when you're going in life, there's like waves. You could be on the top of the wave. You could be at the bottom of the crescent, or the bottom of it, right? And a lot of times, it's like, as an artist, like a lot of times, like what happens is like the bad times, the bad experiences, the melancholy, the sadness, actually drives a lot of our creativity. So it's the negative stuff that a lot of people say, why I want to stay away from that. Well, learning how to actually use it and learn from it and then process it and not like be obsessed by it, but actually use it as a cathartic tool to move forward so that you have like a growth mindset.
Right.
It's very important to like have that lesson learned. Like you're saying, like the lessons learned, like life is giving you those things so that you can use your head, your mind, what you were given to kind of like, oh, it's not always going to be perfect, but that's actually part of the trip.
Right. Right. I mean, that's I want to say that's 80% of getting over that type of adversity, to be honest with you. You know, making sure that, I mean, as the old saying goes, turning lemonade out of lemon. And it's,
Yeah.
just, but the key is to not being stuck. The key
Yes.
is to not being so hyper focused on that failure, but instead being more hyper focused on what that failure can bring. I mean, I think a lot of us needs to be a little bit more opportunistic of stuff like that. And you know what? In my own personal path, I think I found that out. I mean, a little late in late in my life, but eventually, I think I finally understood it, and I put it to work.
I think different people are on different points in their path. And a lot of times I've talked to a lot of people who've gone through like, trauma. And then they're wondering, like, once they get through it, it's like, why didn't I figure that out 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? But you're like, you are where you are.
Exactly.
And so, like, where you find it, it's always good if it happens earlier, but, sometimes it's a benefit. Because if you go through those things, it's like, again, we're talking about that life experience is like immeasurable. It gives
Right.
you who you are. And if once you accept that, well, okay, well, that's where the path I was on. And once you have the ability to kind of learn how to process the internal and the external, and then like understand, it's like there's like, as an artist, we think about the muse, right?
Right.
Oh, there's this external thing that I can tap into, and somehow I'm connected, and I can take what's inside and what's outside, and whatever's happening right now, and kind of just turn into this like crazy soup that ends up being tasty and everybody likes it. When they don't like it, and I learn from it.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've made some bad soups on my way here. So
Yeah, it's the chef kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, chefs are always going to experiment with that next recipe. They don't want to stick to the one they always had. They're always coming up with something new
oh,
because
but
that's, yeah, yeah,
it, it's all those mistakes, and then it's that one golden ingredient that just happens. That's like lightning strike. It just happens, and then all of a sudden it's just pure magic. You know, you're going through so many, you know, as we talked about failure, so many failures, and then all you really need to do is just all that really needs to happen is that one perfect puzzle piece, to get put in place, and then all of a sudden it's just magic. You're like, I don't even know how I created this, but this is freaking awesome now.
Yeah, it's just like sometimes a song comes to me, and just because I trust myself, because I've been playing like 30 years,
Sure.
and I could sit down and compose something on paper and think that's going to be great, right? And
Right.
then what happens is the thing I do off the cuff is like a million times better. And there's just stuff going in my subconscious that I didn't realize. But once you pick up a guitar or pick up a piano, that stuff is there. And when you trust yourself, and I think it happens with painters, it happens with all types of creative people, happens with,
Right.
somebody who's given a lecture and they read the room and then they realize mid conversation, mid speech, oh, this isn't really kicking. I need to change this. And then in that moment, that lecture becomes a unique point in time. And then you get a million views on YouTube or something because it just becomes a magical moment. And you're like, had no idea that was going to happen, but you
Right.
trusted yourself to make it happen.
Right. I mean, we discussed a little bit about the trauma um that that manifests into, these manifests into these positive things in our life later on. I'm actually curious because you're the one that brought that up. I was wondering what type of trauma are you thinking about?
Well, I'm a cancer survivor. And
Oh,
And so when I was 27 years old, I had a level 3 sarcoma. And who I was prior to cancer is a different person than I am today. I was very scared of a lot of things. I was not willing to get out of my shell. I wouldn't have been talking on a podcast. I wouldn't be doing my own music. I was very kind of shy.
you
But
were an introvert.
yeah, introvert. So once I discovered that, I was a musician, but I never wanted to sing my song. I'd give it to somebody else to sing it. I'd be playing in the back on the keyboard, but I would never want to be the front man.
Right.
So the post cancer, I said, you know what? I survived it. What am I scared of? And then I actually went on to live in Japan for like 2 years and do things where people would have said, well, Keith, why would Keith so scared of things? He would never do that. And I did. So I mean, I went and did things that people didn't expect based on who they know, age 26, age 25 versus age 27, getting through something like that. And you don't have to go through something that traumatic to
Right.
realize that maybe the path you're on is not satisfying or it's not your like you have limiting beliefs. But you know, it doesn't hurt to actually, sometimes the things happen to you and those pivotal moments, they don't have to be cancer, they could be something else. But you realize that becomes usable as a launch point.
Right. I mean, congratulations, by the way. That's amazing. I mean, it reminds me of a friend I actually lost to colon cancer. I mean, it was a struggle. He actually didn't tell me until, he was on his final stage.
Oh
He
wow.
didn't.
Yeah, some
So
people get scared of that. It's a scary thing.
it's yeah, it was scary. I can understand why he waited to tell me. But at the same time, oh my God, the floodgates of just what I was thinking about and how I was reacting to it emotionally. And, you know, it was the moment he told me, the stopwatch just started.
Mhm.
It's like, oh my goodness, it's a ticking clock that's just winding down for me. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. Like there's a plethora of things that I need to say and do, you know, or just be with him. Um,
Yeah.
but I find that it's like I don't have the time or he doesn't have the time. And I mean, we talk about trauma in a sense on a personal level for you. For me, it was indirect. If we're just talking about cancer itself, it was very indirect with me, but at the same time, it made me think um, in terms of like how short life really is.
Mhm.
The curveballs that are thrown our way, and I put myself in his shoes, and I decide I and then I'm realizing this could have easily just been me, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, the
putting
empathy. Yeah,
myself
the empathy
and
to figure it out. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Because if you can empathize with somebody, right, then you see the parallels in your life. and
right,
then you actually it's a teaching moment for you.
right. It is a teaching moment for me. I mean, I think, I'm still traumatized by it, to this day. But I mean, it wasn't that too long ago. It was only about 4 years ago,
Mhm.
when that happened. So, I miss him to death. He's he was a staple part of my life. And I don't know, I kinda wish he had just told me sooner.
Yeah, it's a
I feel it
hard
was
thing because like, it's a hard thing to tell people their personal things, like, that are really deep, and the cancer scares you so much, and I found the thing like, I told people, and some people were so freaked out about it, they couldn't handle the situation, and they kinda left my orbit. So,
right,
it's an interesting thing. I've talked to other cancer survivors where, like, when they tell people, some people become, like, closer than they ever thought they ever would, and some people, like, disappear, right?
wow.
So because they can't handle, like, at least I found from other people I've talked to, that's, like, a common thing that can happen, and it's kinda unexpected because you don't think people would do that, but, it is the situation I've heard other survivors talk about.
That blows my mind. That's nothing that I would ever expect. I mean, I would expect, a surprise reaction, being taken aback and, you know, you just gasp at the idea and, maybe go silent for a little bit and you need your thought to process. But I never would expect, you know, your close friends or confidant and, people that you rely on would just ghost you at the news of, this terrible, horrible thing that's happened to you.
Well, it's kinda like what's going on with them, because a lot of times what happens is they can't handle the mortality of it. Because young people, like, I happened when I was 27, and a lot of the kids, they're under 30, they didn't wanna think that that could happen. So it's certain types
Right,
of mindset is like, "Oh, that's a big downer." And they just, you can't, like, I can't control who they are, that's who they are. And so it's
right.
like, if that's who you are, that's who you are. At least I know who you are. So the way I just looked at it is a teaching moment for me, and eventually it's a teaching moment for them because then they start relating, like, was that really who I am? So they can start, some people came back later and said, "Oh, it felt really bad. I just didn't know how to handle it." 10 years later, it's like, yeah, well, that's who you were. I can't control that, but that's how you deal with life. You just like, okay, it's very unexpected how people handle trauma. It's like
Yeah.
you don't know what they're gonna do.
I mean, would you say that, in that situation, are any of those friends, or any of that friendship reconcilable?
There was a couple of people that they kind of explained to me where they were, what their head was at, and I'm a Buddhist, so I kind of like I didn't have a big problem. Like the way I feel is like this is your path, you needed to go that way. If then
Sure,
now you're back in sync with me, that's fine. It's like law of attraction. Like
sure,
you went away because my energy changed. You couldn't handle it, and now you're back in sync because somehow your energy is has got to the same wavelength, and now we're back in sync. It's kind of woo woo, but that's the way I look at it.
Is it the same as before, or has the attraction weakened?
Well, in some cases, some people they got a stronger connection because they actually had to go through something, and they came back, and now they're more like open where before they were kind of closed off. And then other people, like they were on the same path of the same person they were. They were, I didn't really perceive a change. They just seemed to be they were there. And other
Right,
people, they just sometimes you're on a path and people change. Like you could evolve, and then somebody else, you have a group of people that don't like, and they're still there, and you're somewhere else, and then now you're out of sync. So
right.
it's the way I look at it. I've run into situations where it's not as grave as that, but this somehow you change, and then people either are in your orbit or they kind of drop out.
Right, right. I mean, speaking of people out of my orbit, my father actually comes to mind. Um, all right. I should probably start at the beginning, huh? Um, if we talk about trauma, it's not just one instance for me. let's talk about my passion. I love designing, I love illustration, I love the arts and all that. Um, and I've always loved that. Um, but going back to how that manifested, I mean, we're dating it all the way back to early 1980s, right?
Mhm,
During that time, my parents, um, with myself and three of my siblings, we escaped uh, the Cambodian War. For listeners out there who don't know what war this is, you could Google the Khmer Rouge. Um, it
mhm,
decimated over 2 million of our people. We barely escaped it. We were refugees in Thailand and then eventually became refugees in America. Um, in and we had situated ourselves in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is the second most populated Asian city in America,
wow,
second to Long Beach. So in a way, it felt like home, but at the same time, we were also, surrounded by people that were also struggling. We were there, but we were not rich. We came from
mhm,
nothing. We're talking about like absolutely nothing. I remember like the first few houses that we had or apartments that we had were really, really run down. Um, every night was cold, and we were all sharing like maybe a single bed. Um, and some of us opted to sleep on the floor. It was that type of situation. Was that really trauma? Not necessarily. I think I was a little bit too young for that. But the things that were really ridiculous that happened in my life were, I guess, back then. I mean, you were around during that time, I'm guessing.
I'm a child of the '70s, yeah, so I was born, like, '67, so I've been around a bit.
Right. So I mean, in the early 80s, mid 80s to 90s, you know, racism was pretty prominent. And we're not just talking about cultural racism, we're talking about, w- uh, the prejudice of,
Immigrants
being
against
within the
immigrants.
vicinity of like
Yeah,
class.
yeah,
So
immigrants
just
are always a problem, like, I lived in outside of Boston in the '70s, and, I lived in Springfield, Mass, for a
nice.
while, and, I live in New Hampshire, and so there is this kinda thought that Northeast is more liberal, but,
Right.
like, you ever been to South Boston and you're a black guy walk through South Boston, you might run into some trouble.
Yeah.
In the 1970s, I was living outside in a town called Stoughton, and they didn't like busing. And my dad actually got us into a neighborhood where we could get to a good school because he was an insurance guy. He was a manager. So we're
Right.
living in this suburb that didn't have any other African Americans in it. So first day of school, they were like, "We don't want any busing kid here." I said, "Well, I'm not a busing kid. I live here." So I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, class is one thing, race is another thing. I don't think I was met with a lot of, um, I guess, uh, racial prejudice. I think it was more class, if anything.
Class-based, yeah.
I'm showing up to school with like, the same clothes I wore like the day
Mhm.
before, and things of that nature. It wasn't a good look. We were in public school. I was having free lunch, and it's just one of those mentalities where like, oh, you're a free lunch kid.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Like, you get that class bullying because 'cause they're like, "Oh, you're the freelance kid," or "You're on this program, and you're in this special program," and then suddenly, the bullies start going and acting out because, like, "Oh,
right.
you're in this group." Yeah, yeah, you run into that classism structure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I suffer from like hyper empathy, if anything. The things that happened to me, I wasn't too worried about. I was this geeky, nerdy looking kid. Like, I used to wear my pants like all the way up to my chest. It was insane. I mean, I was like the Asian Urkel. It's kind of stupid,
Oh, yeah.
but
Like, oh,
and
nerdy.
um,
I was
but like the hyper empathy that I'm talking about was, it was how my parents were treated. The way I see other people treat my parents. That was like. it was mind-boggling to me because I get it. Um, like me facing that type of adversity during that time. Um, but to see it happen to, my
Your
dad, or to
father and
see
your
it
mom.
happen, right, especially to my mom. I love her to death. My dad, I'm sure he did everything he can to be a great father. Um, I think his lack of understanding of, the cultural world, or, where we are, you know, in terms of like how things are done here versus how things are done in the motherland. Like the treatment that I had from my dad was actually a little bit more sensitive. If anything, he was a very angry person lots of time. And, I'm pretty sure in the 80s everything was like, oh yeah, just beat your kids. It'll turn out, better for them. Which may have been the case, to be honest with you. But
It was a
I'll tell you
70s
what,
thing too. Yeah, 70s
yeah,
thing. I mean, yeah, the idea that disciplining your kids with a belt or slapping them in the 1970s or late 60s, like that's what people thought parents would do.
yeah,
You know, it got more evolved by you get to the 90s and the 2000s, like, oh, you shouldn't do that. But
right.
you ask my parents, and they're old school. They're like,
Yeah.
the kid's doing something wrong, they're gonna get a slap in the butt.
Yeah, I mean,
So
my dad's way of, you know, I guess, uh, I guess reinforcement, his way of reinforcing certain things, I think he goes a little bit overboard, you know?
mm,
Um, it was just his way. It was just his way. You know, I'm pretty sure he didn't want to be, but at the same time, I'm not sure if to be honest with you, I'm not really sure whether or not he lost sleep that night either. So it's
it might
just
have been
one of those
something that
things.
he experienced as a kid, and then
Absolutely.
it's like a traditional thing culturally. A lot of cultures don't have a problem disciplining their kids at levels that other cultures would be like, what? And
Right.
they don't get it. But it's like, you know, if you're coming from a different culture perspective, there's like disconnects between like
Right.
what you do there and what you do here.
I mean, I remember so many details living in those apartments back then, back in Lowell. I mean, we were in the dirty part of town, I guess you can say. I think it was like the grimiest of the grimiest, if I'm being honest. I wouldn't want to live there anymore. I mean, I've driven by there
Mhm.
some time ago just because I felt a little bit nostalgic. It's a 2.5 hour drive from where I live now. And I'll tell you what, as I drove by there, this wave of emotion, it wasn't that feeling of pleasant nostalgia. It was more like it, a sense of foreboding, to be honest.
Oh,
It
go
was
back
kind of a
there.
creepy feeling. Yeah.
If you're going
It,
back to that kind of, yeah, if you're back to a negative experience, then it's gonna have kind of reverberations from that time. Like if you I remember going back to certain points where the bullies, like
yeah.
in Stoughton, Mass, if I went back to the street where I was like bullied on the first day of kindergarten, it kind of brings me back. I still remember it now, and I'm like 56. So
Right.
I remember that place, that time, when things were kind of not so great. So certain things, they kind of stick with you, and they like those places kind of have a vibe if you believe in that.
Yeah, yeah, they do. I mean, I've been to Stoughton. It's better. It's a little better now. We're not talking about 80s Stoughton. We're talking about
Yeah, but I'm
it's
said
more.
1872 Stoughton. It's a totally different world here it is now.
I think it's a totally different world everywhere. Unfortunately, where I grew up, it hasn't changed much. It hasn't changed much at all. I remember one day we had, I guess it was, you'd call it a hate crime. One of our windows got smashed by having some neighbor kid threw a rock right through our window. Right, it
Mhm.
broke the window and then it landed right on my sister's jaw.
Oh, wow.
Boom,
So actually hit her.
smashed.
You had to go to
Yeah,
the
it hit
hospital?
her.
Did you have to
She
go to
had
the
to go to
hospital?
a hospital.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing that I remembered about my dad, how in a way he that day he became a hero to me. Um it doesn't take away from, other things that I didn't like about him, but you know,
Mhm.
I can accept the fact that he was being the best dad that he thought
Could be at the
he
day.
could be.
Yeah.
Um, I remember him immediately reacting to, that rock being thrown into the window and then hitting my sister. He, ran out the door, chased after the kid, and I swear to God, he probably ran for like, a mile chasing after this kid.
Wow.
And, he finally got him and wrung him by the neck. And swear to God, he almost did something that, um, you know, that could have landed him in jail for a while. But he
Mm.
resisted. But then it boggles my mind how is it that you can resist, the temptation to just beat this kid into a pulp, but you can't do that with your own kids. You know,
Yeah,
in
that's
a way,
weird.
he was a hero to me, and I love that the decision he made that day. I loved it, but at the same time, him
That
being
you
my
should carry
hero
it
is
forward,
also
carry it forward to your life at home.
right, right. Why
It's like,
couldn't
how
that
come we
happen?
can't have that separation there? How come we can't figure that out? And
Yeah,
it's like some folks are in their place where they are. And my pop had his problems, and he was never going to kind of get out of the way he was raised was very kind of stuck. He's kind of stuck in a cycle. You
right,
get like some family members and families like finally break cycles because they
right,
start to like look at things and say, well, it doesn't have to be that way,
right,
right? And then you start to question it and you talk about it and you don't just push it down and say, well, just suck it up. You're like, so that tends to be like the American way a lot of times until we got more evolved and say, maybe you shouldn't just suck it up. Maybe
right,
you should like analyze it and figure out what you can change.
right, right. I mean, it didn't occur to me until much later on. Back then, you just accepted it. You take it in the chin. You know, whatever it is that your parents said, you better listen to them, or else it's gonna happen again. And that's how we
Mhm.
learn from it. I guess it's probably not the right term for it, but that was considered negative reinforcement. Um, I mean, being past that, I guess there were other things that were more traumatizing in my life moving forward, and I think I think my passion and the artistic side of what it is that I do for a living, I think it originated from me just being like ridiculously lonely. You know,
Yeah.
growing up as an immigrant, as as the second youngest of my family, being a middle child sucks. It really does.
I'm in the middle.
And
I get it.
so my older brother, my oldest sibling, I mean, he got everything. You know, I think he had like I think my parents bought him like 3 new cars when he was like, at various
Firstborn.
stages of his life.
He's like the
Um,
firstborn type of rule.
yeah, who was the firstborn. And they always I mean, he was actually my role model growing up. I don't think I necessarily had a positive male role model in my life, being that the closest person to me was actually my dad. And I didn't like the way he, handled certain
Right.
things.
Yeah.
Um, but my brother, I thought he was like the best thing in the world. I was like, he was my hero. I mean, I idolized him. You know, he he was the one that actually he was the first one to inspire me to get into illustration. I
Wow.
I grew up with
What did he
illustration.
tell you? What did he tell you to make you want to do that?
He did it himself. I mean, he fell in love with a girl at a certain point in his life. I think it was right before high school. Um, and overnight, I guess he hung a picture of her on his wall. It was hand drawn and it looked exactly like her. I walked into his room, this is years later, by the way. I mean, we've moved out of the slum and all that stuff, so we're fast forwarding ahead. My parents ended up having better jobs and whatnot, but he hung that picture on his wall, and I walked in and I was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing." You know, "You had somebody do this or something?" He's like, "No, I drew it." I was like, "I never even knew you had this talent." Like, all of a sudden, it just this hero of mine, you know, crafted something that was absolutely amazing, and I was like, "Oh, I wanna do that too." I never knew I even had, the talent for it until I actually put pencil to paper,
Oh,
and,
you found out.
out of nowhere, I became the artist in the family. It wasn't him, it wasn't, my adjacent, older sister. She was absolutely talented as well, but eventually it was me where, you know, those guys did it, and, like, my brother and sister, they both, did illustrations, but it was more, as a hobby,
Oh,
whereas I found absolute passion in it. I was like, "Oh my god." I mean, just the idea of creating something, and that and poetry, those were the 2 things that I loved most growing up, during my stage of adolescence. I actually found comfort in that. Having friends are fine, but being in your own headspace and feeling comfortable with it, I mean, that was new for
that's like
me.
the artistic, that's the artistic capability that people don't realize is the ability to be kind of to be able to be at peace with yourself, right? To actually be able to entertain yourself or be able to have like you can be by yourself. You don't need to be in the crowd.
Right,
Some folks seem to be like they can't really operate unless they're with other people. Artists tend to need quiet time. If you're an author, painter, any type of artist, all levels of artists, a lot of times they need that space to be private space to actually collect their capability and do it. And then people wonder, like, well, how can you do that? Because you can be focused, right? And you can actually find a way to express yourself without having to be entertained by other people.
right. I mean, I gotta tell you, I think, uh, I think having discovered that about myself, um, it also emphasized on the fact that I was a massive introvert. Um, I'm being honest with you, like, this whole
Yeah.
interaction that we're having together right now scares the crap out of me. I mean, I feel so ill prepared, and I feel like I ramble. I feel like I don't even know
No,
what
it's
it is that
gold.
I'm talking
It's
about.
gold. This is the kind of my trade is to bring this out of people is what I do. So
I
it's actually
appreciate that. I
it's the
appreciate
gold
that.
of
Thank
what
you.
it's the gold of what I do is to get to the heart of what people who they are, which is what you've been talking about. So can you can
Thank
get
you.
to
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. Part of what it is that I'm trying to do better about myself is understanding my flaws, and that number one is public speaking. Being an introvert, I think that scares the bejesus out of most people. Um, I'm actually forcing myself to get into situations that are a little bit more uncomfortable. I'm not saying that this is uncomfortable. Meeting you is awesome. You're such a great host. You're very inviting. We're having great conversation. Um, but it's just the atmosphere of having to interact with someone that I've never met before. It brings shivers to my spine.
well, it's cool that you're at a point where you can actually be here because there's a lot of people they want to push that button and actually do it, and they just can't. And you're here, so you've
I
already
mean,
gone through.
I've been hovering on that button on that return key for the last year, and it's only just recently where I had the stones to be like, all right, let's just do it.
Well, that's cool. I congratulate you because that's like the step. Like when you like any artist, like the day you take it out of your head and then put it on paper, and then the day you take that piece of paper and show it to somebody, is like
Right,
a couple of steps. It's like you got to have the step to actually put it on paper. Then you got to have the step to actually show it to somebody. And a lot
right,
of people have that hard time with the step from having it exist and then actually sharing it.
Right.
That's a big leap that some people have a hard time getting to.
Yeah. I mean, that on top of many other things too. I mean, I think I decided like long ago that I was gonna be a starving artist. I think I made that decision. I mean,
Mhm.
there were other options, you know. I guess I probably could have gone into like engineering and all that stuff. I mean, I love the digital space. Um, but eventually I was like, you know what? My passion is writing and illustration. And then it grew to something that's a little bit more digital and it became design, you know. So finally finally, working on applications such as, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, all that stuff, um, at a very young age actually prepared me for the world that I'm in now. But I didn't know it back then. I always thought that, hey, you know what? I'm gonna do what I love and I'm gonna starve doing it. All right. What's the point of living if
That's
you're
the
not gonna do
aesthetic.
what you love?
Yeah, that's the typical artist aesthetic, and then what happens is sometimes that starving artist is gives you the discipline to do it because you do it because you love it. Then you
Right.
actually create like a brand, right? You actually create a style, and then you
Right.
eventually realize that there's nothing wrong with monetizing that, right? There's nothing wrong with actually sharing that, or
Right.
and then you actually can fully actualize and wow, I can actually do this as a career. Because
Right.
he's like a lot of times it's like the limitation. We have a limitation of why there's no way I could do that as a career. It's just a passion play. And then you
Right.
find out that you can. It's like, oh, it's like epiphany.
Right. Right. I have two regrets in my life, Phantom. I have two regrets in my life. One of them is no longer a regret, and the other one is, man, I wish I had discovered what my talent's actually worth, and I wish I had taken advantage of that a lot earlier. You know, I think, oh my goodness, I want to say like maybe the discovery should have been about 15 years ago, if anything. But I only made that discovery and made that decision only just 4 years ago when I eventually ended up starting my own business. Um, Prior to that, I was struggling. So we're talking about the one regret that's no longer a regret anymore. That one regret was not going to college, right? The decision I made was, all right, I'm going to be a starving artist. Nothing's going to change my mind. And, my parents were pushing me in all sorts of directions. It's not like I was failing, school or anything. I was bringing home good grades. Um, it's just that, I had no passion for any of that. Growing up as well, my parents also had like, a few failed businesses. Nonetheless, when they did have those businesses, when during the times that it was thriving, I wouldn't say it was failing, I guess. By the time they sold it, I guess they walked away with more money than they put into it, so that works out. Um, but during that time, they were such a stickler for, like, saving money that, they had their kids come in and, help out at the shop. I opted to I opted to have more homework just so I didn't have to do any of that, you know? It wasn't playtime for me. I mean, people get to go home, play basketball and all that stuff and whatever, spend time with their friends. I maybe had time to spend with my friends maybe once a week, you
Yeah.
know? And growing up at that age, like, you have to have your kids play with other kids. It's just one
Yeah.
of those things, but
It's just, yeah.
I grew up in an atmosphere where I felt like I had to work and I wasn't getting paid for it. And it was something that I didn't even want to do. There was no passion in that. I mean, I couldn't even sit in the corner and draw or anything of that sort. So, in a way, I think my parents kind of hindered my productivity into where I'm going, where I was heading towards, like
Mhm.
today. Um, so the regret that I had was ultimately I made the decision that, hey, I'm not, living my life for them, right? I understand what it is to be poor. I understand what it is to not have a lot of money. Um, and I'm actually comfortable with that. I'm not the type of guy that's like, hey, one day I'm gonna own a cruise ship and sail the world and like be a multi-millionaire and all that stuff. I just want enough to be happy, to raise my kid and be humble about my life. Um, and so once I laid that, it wasn't much of a plan. It was just a decision. All right, I'm not going to go to college. I'm not going to spend any more money than I have to because I already know what it is that I want to do. The regret came when I had to try to find jobs
Yeah, they're
in
looking
my
for it.
field.
Yeah, they're looking for it. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many resumes I threw out there and, not a single callback and, it was disheartening. Over the years, that's all I did. I was a professional resume writer at that point, although I wasn't getting paid. Um, so I'm using the word professional wrong. I was a specialist in resume writing. Um, because I've written so many, and the number one thing that they're looking for is a college degree. And it baffles my mind because of the field that I wanted to get in, and it was design. I had all this amazing things that I could show them in my portfolio, and yet they still needed proof that
Where it's like a gate.
I
The problem with the industry, there's a gate that's sometimes not related to your capability. I mean, it happens in the arts all the time. Yeah, all kinds
precisely
of people never went to Berkeley, right? Never
right,
went to London's, School of Music, and never went to any seminary like area where they could have really. There's a lot of people like Hendrix never went to any of those places. The
right,
Beatles didn't go to those places, but everybody expect, oh, you got to go to that to be that. No, you don't. Like, there's a lot
right,
of people that can be through the school of life and passion, get to a skill level that the schools don't even teach, right? So
right.
I think the world today is starting to accept that because of the different delivery systems of online, and now you can present what you
Yeah, we were
can do.
born in the wrong era.
Yeah, yeah, that old time, you couldn't do that because the net wasn't at their level, where now you can actually use the net and you can actually make relationships with people all over the world, not just your neighborhood, and show
Right,
people what you can do. And now companies are actually starting to realize not every creative person comes in a box. Sometimes they have a capability and we want to use them and they don't have the degree. And
right,
maybe that's a good thing as a freelancer. You could go do it. And it's like, yeah, this person is doing what I want them to do. Why do I need that gate of the degree? I don't need if they're actually doing what I want. What do I
right,
need that for?
right. I mean, why do you need proof when I
Yeah,
mean, you need a designer, that's capable of doing these things. I'm showing you a portfolio of things that I've done that I by the way, I was completely self-taught, and this is before Google, this is before, YouTube, where you get taught how to do everything online, like everybody can do anything just by clicking on YouTube. No,
hmm
I learned everything uh in the design spectrum um by myself through what we said earlier. It was making mistakes. Through making all those mistakes, learning new applications, and then understanding how to utilize it even better. um that's what came about with my craft. It took a little bit longer than having somebody to teach me, but at the same time I was so passionate about it that I probably would have cleared a course, faster than any other student, just because I love doing it so
Yeah,
much.
if you love what you do, then it shows, right? And then it's
It
like the law of attraction. Like
right,
people, once they see your work, then that's the evidence of the work. So
right,
you like what the degree is kind of like, it's like window dressing on top of something that's actually functional, right? You have a
right,
functional expert. That happens a lot. There's a lot of people that they find, they have capabilities, and the degree has nothing to do with the capability. I mean, I had a sociology degree. I'm in comp sci. I mean, I'm doing design work for software design, but my sociology degree has nothing to do with that.
right,
But it's like a gate. It was a gate. My interest, I would go hang out with hackers and hang out with programmers, and I never took a comp sci course, but I
right,
liked it. I did it as a
right,
passion thing.
right,
They're starting to understand that now with people. It's like, oh, it doesn't have to fully connect.
right. I
Start to
mean,
figure
it,
it
it
out.
baffles my mind, and that was essentially the final straw for me. I got laid off from a company that I was fully in love with, You know, I used to work at Hasbro, by the way, if you can't tell from my background.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
can see.
I design most of those things that you're seeing in my you know, in this room. Um, but it came to a point where, you know, they they laid me off, me and like 1,000 other people they laid off. I mean, it was a sad time for me,
Mm,
heartbreaking, you know. Um, it was tough coming home telling my wife, like, "Oh yeah, the job that I love so much, I'm no longer doing." You know, I'm no longer commuting 30 minutes there, you know, every single day and 30 minutes back, and you know, doing that 60 hour on that 40 hour salary anymore. It was actually just as bad as how I'm describing it. You know, I worked long hours, produced amazing stuff, and then I was laid off, you know,
like
unexpectedly.
like corporate benefit of the
Yeah,
corporation is like you're a widget. You know, the problem with like they don't like sometimes have that family business kind of feelings. Like, do you really care about the employees, or do they just look like are they just numbers? And then that
right,
starts to make you kind of look at the world like, okay, if that's the way they look at me, then I need to look at things like at me a different way and start to like I'm gonna
right,
value myself and then come up with a new paradigm.
right, right. I mean, you know, I was there for many years, um, and then just the thought of having to start over. Oh my goodness, you know, I have to go through that rat race of sending out resumes all over again. It, you know, it was killing me. And then finally, I connected with a very, um, um, I guess, a very known company, another Fortune 500 company. They were very interested in me, had me sign all the papers. It was like, "Oh, we can't wait for, you know, to have you with us," and stuff like that. And I was like, "All right, a new beginning." And then we had a third interview, even though I signed all the papers, and they asked me, "Hey, we don't see any of your college credentials here."
Oh, geez.
And that was it. I was like, "Yeah, but you see my portfolio, you see my references, you can make a call right now." I mean, I worked at Hasbro. This is like one of the most popular and most creative, you know,
Yeah.
um,
Well, no.
companies that you could work for.
Yeah, that's a
And
really you think that would be enough. Like if you've
you
shown
you
that you work there, you're doing it. So why do
right,
why do you have to have that gate
right.
item? But some people are so traditional. I
So
hope
traditional.
that they can't get out of that paradigm. But the way the world is now, I think it's starting to like people are starting to, there's a lot of kids today. It's like, I'm not paying to be in debt to something
Right,
that's really not adding value if I can do it another way. If I can get certificates, if I can figure it out, if I can go internships, if I can go do these, you know, learn to be apprentices and figure things. There's a lot of people doing things in that way because it's like, why am I going to be in debt if
right.
it's not really going to give me what I want?
So that was the regret. That was regret. That was the peak of my regret. I just got turned down after being accepted from this job that um, that was such a good fit.
Mm,
They loved my stuff. I mean, they see my portfolio, they love my stuff, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's that last minute rejection where I was like, all right, that's the last straw. I am done with corporate. I am done with everything. I'm just gonna open my own business, right? Started it for maybe a year, and I was amazed, like absolutely amazed, surprised, taken aback, just baffled at the idea that I was making already in my first year twice the amount that I was making when I was at Hasbro. I mean,
because you're
and
passionate and you're good. And the thing is, the gate has nothing to do with your ability. The
yes,
gate is the
absolutely.
way that they try to weed out things because they think that's a criteria they need to have. It's like an unnecessary criteria. You discovered it because
Right,
you're
right.
actually
I
making a
wish I discovered it sooner. It's like I told you, Phantom. I that was like, and then, you know what? Immediately, that regret was no longer there. You know, I am living life
because you're
right
doing
now
it.
with a
You're
great
doing it.
job. I mean, no debt. You know, that's how many people can actually really say that. You
Yeah,
know,
there's
and
a
then
lot of kids that
coming
are
coming
starting
from
to
my
figure.
background too.
Yeah, they're starting to figure out because the debt we're loading this debt because it's like a societal like norm. to say, oh, you got to have X because that's to get through the gate. But if X is gonna make you like not financially viable for like 15 years, and you could do it a different way, why can't you entertain that? Because
Right.
you know my daughter is in design, and she decided to go like her own route, and she didn't go get her degree the traditional way. She's been doing a lot of internships and apprenticeships and being in programs and stuff, and then she's getting to where she wants to be, like the way your story is.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, there's so many ways to get to where I am. I think I think it took the long way to get here. I mean, I think she's doing it right. I I definitely took the long way here, and I if I was a smarter man, I think I probably would have figured it out sooner. Um, but
but you were kind
it
of
wasn't
told that
without the
that's
help.
you were kind of told that that's the way it's supposed to be. You know, you were trying to follow
Oh,
that
yeah.
yeah, everybody thinks you got to be in the Fortune 500. Like everybody
Right.
thinks that that's the way you get success. And then a lot of times, like now in this world, there's a lot of micro entrepreneurs, right? There are a lot of people are saying like, why can't I sell my wares or my services and build my own, company? Because you can.
Right.
And
Right.
with a lot of the tools now, with the 3D printers and all kinds of things, there are people that are able to build things without the infrastructure of a big company.
Right.
There are people that create micro little companies that are like, wow, they can do stuff that nobody else would even do because they have so much overhead, and you don't have all that overhead, so you can do a lot of things that are beyond what the big guys can do.
Right. I mean, no, it's insane. Before I think I was making what, $72,000 a year, and that was the peak of my corporate pay. No, the peak of my corporate pay was somewhere around like 80 grand. All right. And then
Mhm.
immediately after venturing out on my own, my lowest annual, income is 150. It can be anywhere between 150 to $300,000 a year. And I just,
That's being an entrepreneur.
it fits into the wheelhouse of me. I don't need to be like insanely rich. I don't. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that's enough
but
for
that's
me to
comfortable.
raise my kid.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
comfortable.
that's where people yeah, because a lot of people think like I need $1,000,000, but the stress with the $1,000,000 job could like kill you. Like if
Right.
you can be comfortable with what suits your requirements, right? You can handle your mortgage, you can handle your bills, you have extra money you can save, you have a health plan.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, then you don't need the $1,000,000. Like, what is it you're
No.
trying to do? Do you want to be in charge of your own destiny? You don't necessarily need the $1,000,000 job to be in charge of your destiny. But
I
some
still
people
like
think that
having some surprises in my life. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like the stress of trying to be the big ticket guy is actually sometimes something you don't want. Sometimes you'd
Exactly.
rather like some artists we could live on a tier where, I'm not doing like you think of like the big guys, like Taylor Swift, right? You can be Dr. Dre. You get these big guys, right? He said, well, you can't be an artist unless you're a big guy. But you can actually be a singer songwriter that maybe only has 100,000, 50,000 fans if you
Right.
don't live like you want to be Taylor Swift.
Right.
You could actually
Right.
be successful at a smaller level because you could
And
sell your own
and
merch. You could sell,
and
so
you're
you
still
can,
doing what you're passionate about,
yeah, you can do
and
what
that's the
you
most
want. You don't get dropped from the label. You don't get laid off because
right.
you control you're never going to get laid off, but you're always going to be able to book your own stuff, sell your own merch, sell your own vinyl, sell your own products. Because like if that's what you want to have, you can have that control without having the overhead. So
Right.
that's a different world today. Like you can be a successful person without thinking like you got to keep up with the Joneses.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, I grew up, you know, having that rule, almost a policy in my head that this is the way. This has to be the way. Corporate life is the dream. I mean, I was psyched when I got hired by CBS, and I got so, you know, I was out of my mind when, Hasbro finally decided, hey, you're good enough to be amongst us. You know, I was surrounded by extremely talented, creative people. Um, and then when it all just went away, it just you know, I just finally gave up on the idea of, hey, you know what, I'm done working for the man. I'm
You
just
never
done with
know.
it.
They always want to pull you back in. The next thing they see, the CEO is like, "Oh, let's bring him back in." But like, it's like you have to decide. Like, I don't like that. Right? If
Right.
you don't like that structure, if you don't like the bureaucracy, if you like to be able to kind of be controlling your vision, like a lot of
Right.
times, if you're an artist and like if you're independent, you can control your content, you can control your vision, you can control your aesthetic, you can control your brand. If you're with
Absolutely.
somebody else, they kind of control what you're going to do, right? And so
Hmm.
the having the freedom to control your own brand, that might be the goal. Like rather than making $1 million, that you will control your brand because that's your brand, that's who you are.
Right. I
I
mean,
think that's the goal,
it
right?
is. It's the absolute goal. You know, I think ultimately is being comfortable in your own shoes. Keep doing what it is that you're doing and hoping to have that positive outcome, but at the same time, working hard to actually achieve that. You know, it's not. I don't think it's 100% luck. I think for me,
It
a
sounds like
great
a lot
deal
of
of
hard
luck
work.
had something to do with it. A great
A
deal
lot
of
of
luck you know, has something to do with it, but it's not without the assistance of very hard work. Um, you know, and the tenacity to to finally, you know, be at the peak of your game, but at the same time, you know, discovering that there's more that there's more opportunity for you than just, you know, being a desk jockey for a corporate company. You know what I
Well, I
mean?
think it's a great story, and I hate to cut it off, but we're always like it takes always takes like the time goes by so fast, and we already hit the hour. But I
I
think it's
appreciate it.
really cool what you're talking about because there's this entrepreneurial spirit and being independent and wanting to control your destiny is like that's why people come to America because they want to be able to make their own business, make their own way. That's the point. And a lot of times that's gotten like, oh, you got to join this big corporation conglomerate. Is that really like, no, I want to kind of be the Henry Ford. I want to be my own Henry Ford. Not that I want to make all the money that Ford makes, but the fact is I want to be able to have my own vision. And so I think your story is very cool. And I want to let people know on your web page if people connect with you, is that how they get in touch with you to get to work on projects?
Yeah, absolutely. Hit up chimeric.com, Khimeric, .com, and you know, come check out my work. Uh, you know, we can direct message each other through there. You know, you can access my portfolio that hasn't been updated for like the last 5 years, by the way. So I don't have any new stuff on there, but you can still, you know, peruse all the old stuff that I have worked on in the past, and get a feel for at least my design style, and hopefully this podcast, um, you know, give them a sense of my personality as well. Actually, I'd like to think that I'm fun to work with.
Oh, you seem like I would say from talking to you, I'm very intrigued by everything that you talked about, and I do encourage our audience to click on that link as we are published on all the platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast. Every platform that exists for that, you'll be able to click through on that link, and you don't have to remember it because if you watch this on Spotify or Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or listen to it on Apple or iHeartRadio, you'll be able to click through on that. Everywhere that we're published will be published there tomorrow. We were live on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
I had such a blast, Phantom. Thank you so much for having me.
We're great. Like I encourage people to check you out because I think you're a cool guy, and they ought to check out what you can do for them.
Thank you so much.